SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation. SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
නියම දෙහිසාරය සහිත විම් ලික්විඩ්.
එක හැන්දයි.
පිරිමැස්මයි.
Tonight, striking a balance. The Justice Minister talks about PTA changes, national security, and ensuring a safer environment for the people.
Anyone detained by the executive should have access to court. So what we are trying to do is balance between the national security and the freedom.
Political rebuke. Parliamentarian issues a clarion call for parties to shed ethno-nationalism.
Reason for this is that we have taken ethno-nationalistic fever as our fundamental way of doing politics. Need a reimagination of our state.
Hand it over. The Colombo Commercial High Court issues a warrant for the seizure of the Express Pearl in expat worker cargo loss compensation case. We are the victims. Sri Lankan exporters respond to government claims of dollar hoarding.
Statement that the exporter community keep the money outside. Not true. Changing US dollar to bring it down to 202 created a big issue.
All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 7th of October, 2021.
Dove conditioners වල ඇති moisture lock system තෙතමනය රඳවා සුසිනිඳු freeze protected කෙස් කලඹක් ලබා දෙයි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. Justice Minister Ali Sabri says that the Prevention of Terrorism Act should be amended in a way that strikes a balance between freedom and national security. Responding on how the government intends to address local and international concerns regarding the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the minister added that the government is looking at amending bail and detention provisions in the Act to ensure more access to courts for detainees. Speaking to Indivari Amuwata on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, the minister also touched on the issue of custodial deaths of arrested suspects, saying that addressing this will entail radical changes to the police department, including body cams and better training.
Sri Lanka's engagement with the international community, especially in terms of human rights, but this is revolving mainly around the Prevention of Terrorism Act. How is Sri Lanka looking at engaging with the international community as well as addressing their demands and requirements?
We need to be an equal partner in the international arena. Equal partner means there are responsibilities as well as privileges. So we will not compromise our national interest or national security. But in the meantime, giving human rights, liberty and freedom of the citizen its due share is not anything not to be proud of. So it is that balance we are trying to achieve here. The PTA had been brought in 1979. Now things have moved on in terms of national security, the new threats. Similarly, in terms of some of the requirement to have better human rights in terms of respecting people's freedom. So we are in the process of discussing those things and come to terms with the realities in the world.
When you say amendments will be brought to the existing PTA, what areas are we looking at?
When detaining somebody and prosecuting someone, Constitution says all citizens who have been detained or charged presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. So that due process has to take place. Anyone detained by the executive should have access to court. So what we are trying to do is permit more access to court. The bail provisions, the detention provision, then opportunity for courts to call for records and looking at it and find a merit to continuous detention. Those are the areas of concerns which we are discussing and trying to get a balance between the national security and the freedom.
Another area of concern, custodial deaths of suspects under police detention. You came out to talk about the need to look into this. What kind of progress are you making, Minister?
I brought a law to Parliament in terms of which every magistrate is required and empowered to visit the places of detention in his area. That means he can go to the police station, he can go to the CID, he can go to the remand prisons and find out the conditions of it. So that's one way of ensuring that those conditions are humanitarian. We have continuously had discussion with the minister in charge of public security and the IGP, the need to have a proper mechanism. One progressive matter is that we are slowly trying to equip the police with a body cam. When that happens, you can go and say something else because everything gets recorded. Some of those things we have to eliminate it, how difficult it may be on national security, but still we need to have that balance because we are a state. State means the people. We have to play in terms of the law and rules, not against the law. An extremist or a terrorist need to succeed only once, but government and the police and the law enforcement authorities need to succeed in all attempts.
How difficult is it to bring in these much needed amendments to the laws?
It's not easy. It's a cumbersome process. There are diverse views. When one school of thought talks about the freedom, the other school of thought is about the freedom for the law enforcement authorities to do their job. But basically what we want is a balance here where the powers which are being given lawfully are not abused. It has to come in terms of training, in terms of paradigm shift.
Will this be a long-term process, Minister? Because you're talking about training here and changing the mindset of our law enforcement authorities also.
Suda's case. They went to court and court gave an injunction without the supervision of a magistrate or something. That is why this judicial independence and an efficient and efficacious judiciary is very important, because these competing interest of the law enforcement authority and the subjects and their freedom will always be there. So somebody in the middle had to be an arbitrator, look at each other's case and prevent excesses. It is there, the courts have a great role to play. Now we have increased the number of judges in the Supreme Court. In the Court of Appeal, almost doubled it during the 20th Amendment. 12 judges in the Court of Appeal to 20 judges, which is after 42 years. And if we can do that in the High Courts and the Magistrate Courts also, the courts will have a better supervision.
In Parliament today, Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna MP Dr. Suren Raghavan issued a stern rebuke of what he termed ethno-nationalistic politics practiced by the Tamil National Alliance that he says was clearly evident by the party's request to the European Union to withdraw the country's GSP Plus concessions. Dr. Raghavan added that the current government stands at the right moment in history to bring about radical changes and focus on more important things such as reclaiming Sri Lanka standing on the global stage.
Today, when I am listening to the debates in this House, we could see how ethno-nationalistic we have become instead of answering our deepening questions about our economy, about the place that Sri Lanka should be holding in the international community and in the regional category. We are still blaming each other. The reason for this is that we have taken ethno-nationalistic fever as our fundamental way of doing politics. We need a reimagination of our state where all the citizens are equal, where democracy will be the most qualifying condition to draw a social contract between the state and society, for which I think we have the opportunity. In my humble learning as a political scientist, my prediction is that there won't be a stronger government than this in the future. ඒ නිසා මේයි අවස්ථාව. අපේ රාජ්‍යයේ ව්‍යුහාත්මක වෙනසක් කළ යුතු අවස්ථාව මේක. සමහරක් දෙමළ ජාතිකවාදීන් බය වෙලා ඉන්නවා අපි ඩයස්පෝරාත් එක්ක කතා කරනවායි කියලා. අපි කතා කළ යුතුයි. නමුත් කතා කරන මොහොතේදී we must be ready to change. Dialogue must demand listening and change. මේ බෙදුන්වාදී වර්ගවාදී දේශපාලනයට ලැබුණු ලොකුම උදාහරණය නම් ශ්‍රී ලංකාව ආර්ථික වටයෙන් වැටී තිබෙන මේ මොහොතේදී GSP සහන සම්බන්ධයෙන් යුරෝපීය හමුවේ හවුල මේ ලංකාවට පැමිණි මොහොතේදී දෙමළ ජාතිකවාදීන් විසින් ගිහින් කිව්වා GSP දෙන්න එපා ලංකාවට තහනම් කරන්න මේක කියලා. මම එයාට කියන්න කැමතියි ජනතා විරෝධී වෙන්න එපා. ඔබ ගන්න වැටුප ඔබට ලැබෙන සියලුම වරප්‍රසාද ලැබෙන්නේ මේ රටේ ජනතා අහිංසක ජනතාව ගෙවන බදු වලින්. ඒ නිසා පටු වර්ගවාදී දේශපාලනය නිසා මේ මගේ මව්බිමත් එරෙහිව වැඩ කරන්න එපා කියන ඉතාමත්ම ඕනෑකමින් ඉල්ලීමක් මම දෙමළ ජාතික සන්ධානයේ කණ්ඩායමට සහ උන්ගේ ඉතුරු කණ්ඩායමට මම කියන්නට කැමතියි.
Another Sri Lankan identified as a former LTTE intelligence operative has been arrested by India's National Investigation Agency in connection with the Virinyam arms and drug trafficking case. The agency revealed that the suspect had played a crucial role in using drug profits to support the revival of LTTE in Sri Lanka.
In March, the Indian Coast Guard apprehended 9 suspects, including 6 Sri Lankans on board fishing vessel Ravi Hansi, along with 300 kilograms of heroin and automatic weapons. The vessel was seized off Virinyam, located near Thiruvananthapuram in India. With 5 AK-47 rifles and 1,000 rounds of 9mm ammunition being found aboard the seized vessel, India's Narcotics Control Bureau filed a complaint with the country's National Investigation Agency under the Arms Act against the 6 arrested Sri Lankans. Taking over the case, the NIA on Tuesday nabbed another Sri Lankan for his involvement in the trafficking of arms and drugs from Pakistan to Sri Lanka in connection with the Virinyam arms case. Issuing the statement yesterday, the agency identifies the suspect as 47-year-old Satgunam alias Sabesan, a former member of the LTTE's intelligence wing. The investigation has also revealed that the accused had arranged meetings for LTTE sympathizers in India. A resident of Chennai, Sabesan is said to have played a crucial role in routing the proceeds of drug trafficking to former LTTE cadres in Sri Lanka for the revival of the LTTE.
The Commercial High Court in Colombo issued an arrest warrant on the submerged vessel MV Express Pearl following a case filed by a private cargo company with whom the ship owners haven't settled its claim for the compensation for the loss of 6 containers of Sri Lankan expat worker cargo from Qatar. Summons were also issued to the ship owners to appear before the court on the 21st of October.
In the month of May this year, Sri Lanka witnessed its biggest maritime environmental disaster when feeder vessel MV Express Pearl caught fire just outside the port of Colombo. So far, the exact financial cost of undoing the environmental damage is yet to be properly assessed, with legal processes currently underway. By the time the blaze aboard the vessel was doused and brought under control, its cargo, consisting of 1,500 containers, were either completely destroyed by the fire or simply fell aboard and washed up on the country's shoreline. Most of the cargo consisted of consumer goods and chemicals being transported to various destinations along the vessel's route. However, some of the cargo lost held more of a personal value. With over 180,000 Sri Lankans employed in Qatar, the vessel's previous port of call before Colombo, some of the containers held goods purchased with their hard-earned cash and were being sent back home to their families. With more than 4 months having passed since the disaster, the question of compensation for lost cargo has been taken up with the Express Pearl's owning company by cargo company Trico Maritime. With the company having had 6 containers or 128 tons of expat worker goods on board the vessel at an estimated value of over $600,000, the loss is considerable. With that, the company filed a case at the Commercial High Court in Colombo yesterday, claiming compensation of $622,137 as well as accrued interest and legal costs. The case was filed under paragraph G, subsection 1 of subsection 2 of the Admiralty Jurisdiction Act that states that the Admiralty Jurisdiction of the High Court of the Republic of Sri Lanka has the jurisdiction to hear any case pertaining to any claim for loss or damage to goods carried on board a ship. Accordingly, the court issued summons yesterday to the ship owners or its local representatives to appear before the court on the 21st of October. According to the cargo company, it was forced to file action for compensation due to the lack of a response from Express Pearl's owners to overtures for compensation since as far back as June, just 1 month after the disaster. Accordingly, when the case was taken up, based on a request by attorneys representing the cargo company, the court issued an arrest warrant on the vessel. With that, the warrant is to be submitted to the Director General of Merchant Shipping tomorrow for further action, which may entail seizure of the damaged vessel.
Big 3.
Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa presented the appropriation bill amounting to 2.505 trillion rupees for the year 2022 in Parliament today. The annual budget for year 2022 will be presented on the 12th of November, with a third reading and the vote have been scheduled for the 10th of December.
Minister of Finance Basil Rajapaksa presented the appropriation bill for the year 2022 in Parliament today. According to the bill, a total of 2.505 trillion rupees has been estimated for government expenditure for the year 2022. Of this figure, 1.776 trillion rupees has been set out as recurrent expenditure. A sum of 12.6 billion rupees has been allocated for public services, including expenditure of the President's and Prime Minister's offices, Parliament, and independent commissions. The sum allocated for the President's office is 2.78 billion rupees, which is a 6.6 billion rupee reduction when compared to the 9.34 billion rupees allocated in 2021. Further expenditure for the Ministry of Defence for 2022 has risen to 373 billion rupees. Meanwhile, 286.7 billion rupees has been allocated for the Ministry of Provincial Councils and Local Government. 185.9 billion rupees in expenditure has been allocated to the Ministry of Finance, while the estimated expenditure for the Ministry of Highways for 2022 is 250.1 billion rupees. The expenditure allocation for the Ministry of Mass Media is 20.2 billion rupees. 19.4 billion rupees have been allocated to the Ministry of Justice for 2022, while the amount allocated to the Ministry of Health is 153.5 billion rupees. The Ministry of Trade was allocated 4.4 billion rupees. Further, a sum of 127.6 billion rupees has been estimated for total expenditure for the Ministry of Education next year. Meanwhile, 2.6 billion has been allocated to the Ministry of Industries along with 1.5 billion rupees to the Ministry of Ports and Shipping. Estimated expenditure for the Ministry of Youth and Sports is 5.5 billion rupees.
10 new priorities were added under the purview of the Ministry of Finance following the issuing of a Gazette Extraordinary by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa yesterday. Among the new priorities, the Ministry of Finance is also now charged with strengthening of banks and financial institutions to encourage savings and investments while also broadening and coordinating national development, financial and capital market programs for development of agricultural and construction.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa issued a Gazette Extraordinary yesterday amending the special priorities related to the institutional and legal framework of the Ministry of Finance. As per the Gazette notification, 10 more priorities have been added to the Ministry of Finance. Accordingly, the Ministry of Finance, among the other things, will now implement reforms to strengthen banks, strengthen financial institutions in such a manner that would encourage savings and investments as well as institutional reforms to revive failed financial institutions and businesses. It will also broaden and coordinate national development, financial and capital market programs for the development of agriculture, construction, information technology, small and medium enterprises, tourism and export sectors. The Ministry of Finance is also tasked with strengthening the regulatory and reform activities of treasury bills and bonds and primary markets, and providing facilities required for international business giants to set up their head offices in Colombo and the port city. Further amendments were made to the department's statutory institutions and public corporations listed under the Finance Ministry.
Health officials today offered words of reassurance to parents reluctant to send their children to school by saying that kids' immune systems are strong enough to prevent severe complications from COVID-19. Speaking on the issue today, President of the Association of Specialist Family Physicians, Dr. Malkanthi Galhena, said that parents can assure protection by instilling good health habits and ensure that they stay completely hydrated during school hours.
Sri Lanka continues to gain a strong foothold against the once rampant COVID-19 virus, with daily infections currently in decline. As such, with the daily cases falling below 1,000, authorities decided to partially reopen the country on the 1st of October. After considering the partial reopening of the country, which was made possible due to an island-wide curfew and a successful vaccination drive, officials at the Ministries of Health and Education announced their plans to reopen all schools with students below 200 on the 21st of October. Students have continued to face issues with efforts taken to conduct academic activities online rendered ineffective, as the teachers and principal unions currently are on an island-wide strike. Despite this, health officials said today that parents have expressed concerns and are reluctant to send their children to school owing to fears of COVID infection.
දරුවන්ගේ ප්‍රතිශක්තිකරණ පද්ධතිය ඉතාමත් සක්‍රියයි. නිසා රෝගේ වැළඳුණත් ඔවුන්ට නිදන්ගත රෝග නැතිනම් ඔවුන්ට බොහෝ වෙලාවට සංකූලතාවලින් තොරව මෙම රෝගය වැළඳී සුව වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඉතින් ඊට අමතරව ඇත්තටම දෙමව්පියන් වගකීම ගත යුත්තේ දරුවන්ව පාසලට යැවීමට දැන්ම සිටම්ම ඔවුන්ගේ සෞඛ්‍ය සම්පන්න පුරුදු සඳහා ඔවුන්ව හුරු කිරීමයි. සහ ඔහුගේ කෑම බීම මෙම රෝගී තත්ත්වය නිසා අනිකුත් අය සමග බෙදා හදාගෙන පාසලේදී කෑමට අධෛර්ය කිරීම කළ යුතුයි. ඊට අමතරව දරුවා නිසි පරිදි පාසල් යන අවස්ථාවේදී ඔවුන්ගේ ප්‍රතිශක්තිකරණ පද්ධතිය ඉහළ දමා ගැනීම සඳහා විජලනයෙන් වළක්වා ගැනීම අත්‍යවශ්‍ය කරුණක්.
On developments on the country's vaccine front, Sri Lanka has so far seen the complete inoculation of 12,043,368 people. According to the epidemiology unit, this amounts to 56% of the country's total population being fully immunized against the virus. This leaves 2,596,311 people currently awaiting to receive the second jab of a vaccine. Further, due to such a high vaccination rate, the Ministry of Health today announced that the Committee on Communicable Diseases has given the green light for the administration of booster shots.
Our National Advisory Committee on Communicable Diseases met yesterday and took a decision in principle to recommend to the government to allow a third dose of vaccine to people who are already got first 2 doses of vaccine, and the details of how this will be implemented and where and what are the categories of people who will get priority need to be stipulated in specific guidelines and the circulars issued by the Director General. This will be communicated to those who are eligible people from time to time from the hospitals and other clinic centers.
In a landmark move, the Sri Lanka Police promoted 3 women officers to the rank of Acting Deputy Inspector General simultaneously today. Officers SSP ND Senaviratna, SSP SAR Jayasundara and SSP WJ Padmini, who were promoted to the rank of Acting Deputy Inspector General of Police, will now head 3 police divisions.
For the first time in Sri Lanka's history, the Sri Lanka Police has simultaneously promoted 3 women senior superintendents of the police to the ranks of Acting Deputy Inspector Generals with immediate effect from today. The promotions were granted to SSP ND Senaviratna, SSP SAR Jayasundara and SSP WJ Padmini following approval from the Secretary to the Public Security Ministry. As such, newly promoted Acting DIG ND Senaviratna, currently serving in the State Intelligence Service, has been appointed to the head of the Police Information and Technology Division. Meanwhile, Acting DIG SAR Jayasundara, who formerly served at the Research and Development Division, will now head the Child and Women's Bureau. Acting DIG WJ Padmini, meanwhile, will continue in a position heading the Police Welfare Division. Police media spokesperson SSP Nihal Talduwa said that the Sri Lanka Police Department is being restructured in a manner that paves the way for talented and skilled women police officers to reach the ranks of Inspector General of Police.
The National Chamber of Exporters of Sri Lanka says that it remains discouraged by certain decisions made by the government that directly affect exporters, including the stabilizing of the dollar exchange rate to its current levels. Speaking at a virtual media briefing, President of the NCE, Jayantha Karunaratne, called for a stable policy to encourage the exporters of the country and also rejected government claims of exporters not repatriating their dollars.
The exporters are very concerned about the statement made by the regulators that the exporter community keep the money outside and they don't convert into Sri Lanka rupees. This is in fact, as an exporter, it's not true. Maybe sometimes people keep some amount of dollars in their dollar accounts for use for their imports of raw materials. But that is also for the business. If we don't bring our money in, we can't operate. But there was a time we felt the government was holding the US dollar at a rate, and there were speculation that the dollar is going to go up, rupee is going to depreciate. So people were holding in their dollar accounts, expecting a little extra. But I think they should understand exporters suffered a lot during the last 1.5 years. As per the government records, the export sector has done very well during this year, even with all these international issues.
Karunaratne was also critical of government actions to stabilize the rupee after it reached the 202 rupee range to the US dollar this year, which he says made all the more difficult for exporters.
Changing the US dollar to about 229, 230, suddenly to bring it down to 202 created a big issue with the exports. What is important is to encourage exports. discourage imports. But I think what is happening now, we encourage imports, discourage exports. The decisions by the central bank not to pay interest for dollar deposits by exporters. When you do that, you don't allow the exporter to make that money. And also the idea of trying to charge additional taxes on the exporters, or that 28% tax is also going to discourage exporters. What is important is for us to have a stable policy and encouragement for exporters to work more harder and earn more money.
The all-share price index was up by 44.55 points to end at 9,671, with the S&P SL 20 index of more liquid stocks ending at 3,619.46, gaining 17.1 points. The market turnover was 3.4 billion rupees. Here's Dimantha Matthew with a brief report on today's market performance.
Today we saw the market again in the green territory, up by around 44 points as the index climbed to 9,671 points. The index seems to be moving closer and closer towards the 10,000 mark now, and we are seeing strong buying interest continuing during the day as well. So overall we saw a bit of a banking sector run during the day with a lot of turnover in the banking sector shares. So almost all the banking sector counters moved up in value, significantly contributing to the turnover levels. So overall we saw the index being moved by some of the illiquid counters as well. So the bulk of the movement came out of some of the high cap illiquid counters. However, the banking sector also supported the upward trend of the index. In addition to that, the overall turnover levels was slightly lower, around the 3.5 billion mark, bit of a dip from yesterday.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.